We're back to the way of the Pilgrim, and our young man wandering,
Did you
looking
pin
for
yourself, Mario?
truth. We're on page 20 at the very last paragraph, starting with I forget. He's been robbed, as you remember, and then a group of military came along, or policemen, and they had already caught the robbers, and he was able to get back his books from them. He's very excited about that. And so tonight he picks up. I'm just trying to figure out what this last portion was. Yeah, so he's picking up the Gospels at this point. All right. So he says, I forget what I gave the monk, but I bought his book of the Gospels. I put it away in a trunk with my other things and forgot it. Some while afterward, speaking of this reminds me, Philip, one of my friends, he got a copy of the Gita when he was like 14 or something, that he got at a yard sale or some weird place like that. And when he took it home he kind of just put it on his shelf and didn't think about it again until he was leaving for college. And when he picked up the Bhagavad Gita when he was packing his stuff, in that Gita was the card from the bookstore in Hollywood, and it fell out, and it was right near it was not too far for him to go, and so he thought, oh well, maybe I'll just go drop by and see them before I leave town to go to school. And then of course he ended up becoming a monk some years later, but all from just having been given a book that had a card in it that fell out. And it's funny because this man that's been writing from Edmonton also was talking about synchronicity, and how he and I have been writing back and forth for a while, and he had decided he was going to read the Bhagavad Gita, and he said the very next day a friend of his came by and dropped off a copy of the Bhagavad Gita for him out of the blue. No request, no discussion, nothing. That just the day after he had talked to me and had decided he was going to get a copy or he's going to read it, the very next day one turns up, and he was asking me, is that on purpose, or how does that kind of thing happen? And it's just, so just reading this first sentence made me think like that. We are in the mind of God. It's, in one sense, we talk about our non-existence, how we as egoed individuals don't really exist, that we're just a section of thoughts in the mind of God that we've pulled together and created an identity with. And sometimes, that sounds a little negative, like, oh my God, I don't have any real existence. But the fact is, the existence, even if it isn't sustained in and of itself, even if it requires the mind of God for us to exist, we still experience our existence, given by the divine. And the wonderful thing is that we're playing in the mind of God, that we are a thought in the mind of God, and a collection of limitations and restrictions around that thought in the mind of God. But when we dissolve, it's not into nothingness. It's not into zero. We dissolve into the divine, and if you're going to be nothing, that's a great way to be nothing, is to dissolve into the beloved. Some while afterward, a bout of drunkenness threatened me. That's an interesting way of saying it. An irresistible desire for the drink drove me hurriedly to open my trunk and to get some money and to rush off to the public house. But the first thing my eyes fell on was a copy of the Gospels, and all that the monk had said came back vividly to my mind. I opened the book and began to read the first chapter of St. Matthew. I got to the end of it without understanding a word. Still, I remembered that the monk had said, oh, you know what? I don't think this is the Pilgrim that's talking. I think this is the story of that drunkard who he has met on the road, and he's telling him his story. Yeah, because our our pilgrim, I was trying to think, he wasn't a drinker. Why? But the friend that he met was a drinker. That's why I was when we started, I was looking at that previous paragraph and it wasn't clicking, and I was like, well, I can either sit here and keep reading and or we'll just jump in. So okay, so he's talking to this man that he's met on the road. One of the policemen actually.
It's an officer, right, Swami?
An officer, yeah, that he's met on the road in this caravan. Okay.
Right, right.
So he's telling his story about he got this copy of the Gospels from a monk, and he was sorely wanting to go and drink. And he opened up looking for some money to go to the public house. And he says he opened, and the first thing he saw was this book on the Gospels. I opened the book and I began to read the first chapter of St. Matthew. I got to the end of it without understanding a word. Still, I remembered that the monk had said, no matter if you do not understand, go on reading diligently. Come, said I must read the second chapter. I did so, and I began to understand a little. So I started on the third chapter, and then the barracks bell began to ring. Everyone had to go to bed. No one was allowed to go out, and I had to stay where I was. When I got up in the morning, I was just on the point of going out to get some wine when I suddenly thought, supposing I were to read another chapter, what would be the result? I read it, and I did not go to the public house. Again, I felt the craving, and again, I read a chapter. I felt a certain amount of relief. This encouraged me, and from that time on, whenever I felt the need of a drink, I used to read a chapter of the Gospels. What is more, as time went on, things got better and better, and by the time I had finished all 4 Gospels, my drunkenness was absolutely a thing of the past, and I felt nothing but disgust for it. It is just 20 years now since I drank a drop of alcohol. There's a lot to be said about this here. It's something that I think Vedanta has been years in making, for me anyway, is this notion of everything that you experience. We've talked about this before, but bear with me because it has a particular pragmatism to it. If you can understand that everything you experience, everything that you are, everything that you want, everything you remember, everything that you desire, is in the end, in reality, only a thought, a collection of thinking. If you are wanting something terribly, like a vice of some kind, to remember that that is only a thought, and if that thought is not in the mind, then the struggle is not there. We often will divide our sentience with our own mind. That's what it means to be attached to something. To be attached to something means that you identify with it. You say, that's me, or that's mine, or that's I. You attach it to your I. And that's what gives it the sense of sentience. And what I mean by that is when you're arguing with yourself, that's actually an impossible scenario. Because there's only one of you. There is not two there. There's no one in you to argue with. You are alone in there. And so when we argue with our own mind, what we've done is we've shared our sentience with the mind, given it a sense of power, giving it a sense of autonomy that we feel like we have to defend ourselves against, or that we have to argue with, or that we have to convince it of something. And as long as we stay broken in two like that, arguing with our own self like that, we're going to lose in the end. Because I don't think everybody's mind is quite as dastardly as my own, but I know in my own mind that when I argue with myself like that, that my mind has already won. I'm going to lose that argument. And my mind only carries on the argument long enough for me to feel like I've tried hard enough to resist, so that I can lay down and be a victim and indulge in my vice, right? So that's just a window to my own horrible mind, and I'm sorry to bring you there. But what I have found only in the last couple of years is this notion of unifying yourself. Understand that it's just a thought in the mind. It has no sentience. The mind has no power over you. The argument has no power over you. That if you say no, it's no until you decide that it's not a no anymore. And that if the mind keeps nagging you for it, it's because you haven't absolutely said no. You know that there's a possibility that you can get around it. And so the mind seems to keep nagging you, but it's you who keeps letting it come back because you haven't really said no. That's why Jesus is so emphatic about a person learning to say for his no's to be no and his yeses to be yes. You know, it's a matter of personal integrity. And so what we're seeing here is a great way of dealing with that. It's like instead of having that thought remain in your mind and nag you to death until you give in or until you lose your battle, take the thought away. You can either use your mantra for doing it. You can use a book for doing it, like he's talking about here. You can use prayer for it. You can use a walk for it. You can use the dishes for it. You can use whatever you want, but come up with a strategy of distraction for yourself. When you're in one of those states, you know, when something is nagging you and it's not helpful, come up with one of these ideas of getting out of the situation and diverting your mind into a different way of thinking. And so the master teaches that. Vivekananda does that all the time. He said that we have to replace our bad thoughts with good thoughts, you know, our unhelpful tendencies with good tendencies, our weaknesses with strength. And so this, exactly what we're reading here, is how you go about doing that. You know, it's your mind. Nowhere in your mind are you ever a victim. Nowhere in your mind does anything happen that you don't want to happen. It's a very important thing to remember that, to know that there's just you in your body. There's no one else in there. And so you pick yourself up by the bootstraps, as they say. Let your yes be yes and your no by no. And if you feel like you're in danger, have a strategy. You know where the fire exit is. Know what you're going to do so that you don't sit there and continue in a bad habit, or continue in feeding a samskara, an unhelpful samskara. So, and it worked for him. He's gone now 20 years without a drink, without a drop of alcohol. Everybody was astonished at the change brought about in me. Some 3 years later, my commission was restored to me. In due course, I was promoted and finally got my majority. I married. I am blessed with a good wife. We have made a position for ourselves, and so, thank God, we are going on living our life. As far as we can, we help the poor and give hospitality to pilgrims. Why, now I have a son who is an officer and a first-rate fellow. And mark this, since the time I was cured of drunkenness, I have lived under a vow to read the Gospels every single day of my life, one whole Gospel in every 24 hours, and I let nothing whatever hinder me. Okay, so he's giving us quite a few little good methods here, that he now reads in every 24 hours he reads. That's quite a bit of reading, actually. The Gospels are slow reading. But, that he reads every single day. He keeps the habit up, even though it's been 20 years. It's important not to let your guard down, even after 20 years. And everything is working out in his life. He actually is winning. He's getting himself together, getting it all together, but his commitment remains. And his commitment was such that I let nothing whatever hinder me. There is never, oh my God, and this is where I have to get on my knees and just beg Mother to let me say this without feeling horrible, because I miss my meditations every now and then, But here he says that nothing whatever will hinder him. He's made a commitment, and there is nothing important enough to break that commitment. I remember when back when I first started to meditate, and of course I tell this story all the time, that I did it 2 minutes twice a day, because that's what I thought I could make myself do. And my teacher told me, not long after that if there comes a time when you can't do your meditation that you just don't have time, some emergency or something that just can't be helped, she said, you still do not walk away without doing your meditation. You do something. You go in, you kneel in the shrine, you explain to the Divine Mother, I'm not going to be able to do my meditation today because I'm doing this, Mother, but I want to spend just a minute here thinking of you and being with you. And you quietly set your mind, and then you get up and go do your thing. But you never make the assumption that you don't need to do your practice and just walk away or get busy and not think about it. So even if you can't do the practice, you still stop into the shrine, explain why you can't do your practice. You have a second or two of quiet, and then you get up and go do what you need to do. But always, always keep the marker marked in the mind that this is practice time. This is time with the beloved. And don't miss it. This is how you get this kind of success. This is how you achieve this kind of strength. Because after 20 years of doing this, you can know this man is indeed a changed person. And you look at Girish Ghosh, you know, our favorite bohemian, you know, and you see the success that he had. He became a saint. And here we are remembering him decades, you know, a century later. He says, I do this still for 20 years, and still he's going on with this habit. If I am exceedingly pressed with business and unusually tired, I lie down and I get my wife or my son to read the whole of one of the evangelists to me, and so avoid breaking my rule. Okay, see? So you see, there are times when it seems like you just can't. I'm just too tired to do this. Well, you come up with some way. You come up with some creative way of not breaking your vow, of not letting go of your commitment. Oh my goodness. Just letting that roast into my pained heart just a little bit. You know, sometimes you read these things and you become aware, you're like, oh boy, I've slacked off without realizing I've slacked off, or I've gotten easy on myself without realizing I've gotten easy on myself. So it's times like this that we recommit, you know, that that's what I'm doing in front of you right now, making a class of it. Nonetheless, you know, saying and realizing, okay, wow, all right. And what you do is you recommit and you get up and you keep going. That's all, nothing more. You know, the mind slips from God, realize it, put it back on God, and keep going. No kicking yourself around the block, no feeling sorry, nothing like that. The mind, the ego will use that, will leverage that against you. So don't give it that space. So I get my son to read the whole of one of the evangelists to me, and so avoid breaking my rule. By way of thanksgiving and for the glory of God, I have had this book of the Gospels mounted in pure silver, and I always carry it in my breast pocket. I listened with great joy to this story of his. I also have come across a case of the same sort, I told him. At the factory in our village, there was a craftsman, very skillful at his job, and a good, kindly fellow. Unhappily, however, he also drank, and very often at that. A certain God-fearing man advised him when the desire for drink seized him to repeat the prayer of Jesus 33 times in honor of the Holy Trinity, and in memory of the 33 years of the earthly life of Jesus Christ. He took his advice and started to carry it out, and very soon he quite gave up drinking. And what is more, 3 years later, he went into a monastery. That is beautiful. So in this case, he's using the mantra, you know, to keep the mind there, and choosing a certain number of times, which has a significance. To him, it was 33 years for the age of Jesus when he was crucified. And so these are the ways, you know, that we move forward. You know, that's the beauty of grace. That's the beauty of an unconditioned love. That's the beauty of the ideal that we worship, that we follow, is this constant opportunity for renewing. You know, one of the practices that, one of the statements in that little poem that I read this week in the blog was how we're required to meet the moment freshly as the moment meets us freshly at every moment. to always know that because of grace, this moment is brand new for you right now. You can be whatever you want to be in this moment. You can accomplish whatever you want to accomplish in this moment. You do not have to obey your samskaras. You do not have to be prey to your karmas. You don't have to fall in line with old habits and lifestyles. This moment is always new because of grace, because of the mercy and unconditioned love of God. You always have permission to forget your wrongs, pick yourself up, and change your direction, always. So we should take advantage of that, because it's one of the greatest gifts of life, actually, to never have to be trapped in something we don't want to be trapped in. We always have the strength to change. We always have permission to change. We can always get up and go again. And it's odd, because I always tell people too, he says that 3 years later, this guy moved into a monastery. 2 years after I started doing my 2 minutes twice a day, I ended up in a monastery also. So that's a warning to you that we're not playing with something that has no power. We're playing with something that can revolutionize and will revolutionize your life, revolutionize your experience of being. And so know that. This is no toy that we're goofing around with here. And which is the best, he asked, the prayer of Jesus or the Gospels? It's all one and the same thing, I answered beautifully. What the Gospel is, that the prayer of Jesus is also. For the divine name of Jesus Christ holds in itself the whole gospel truth. The Holy Fathers say that the prayer of Jesus is a summary of the Gospels. Wonderful. That's, anytime you speak God's name, God in his entirety, in her fullness, is present. And that's a marvelous thing to meditate on. When you sit there and say your mantra a single time in your mind, remember that. This has invoked the divine presence. God is present. And to sit there and let that soak in, let that soak deep down inside. Divine love. You are in the presence of divine love. You're in the presence of the omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent love of the universe and beyond. After we talked, we said prayers, and the Major began to read the Gospel of St. Mark from the beginning, and I listened and said the prayer in my heart. At 2 o'clock in the morning, he came to the end of the Gospel, and we parted and went to bed. As usual, I got up early in the morning. Everyone was still asleep. As soon as it began to get light, I eagerly seized my beloved Philokalia. With what gladness I opened it. I might have been getting a glimpse of my own father coming back from the far country, or of a friend risen from the dead. I kissed it, and I thanked God for giving it back to me again. I began at once to read Theolept of Philadelphia in the second part of the book. Okay, let me make a mark of that, and we'll go over that next week. We'll look up the teachings of Theolept of Philadelphia. In the second part of the book, his teachings surprised me when he lays down that one and the same person at one and the same time should do 3 quite different things. Seated at table, he says, supply your body with food, and your ear with reading, and your mind with prayer. But the memory of the very evening the day before really gave me, from my own experience, the meaning of this thought. And here also the secret was revealed to me, that the mind and the heart are not one and the same thing, right? So that's why Thakur says, that he gives that wonderful illustration of the woman who's nursing her child, helping the customer across the counter, and also replacing the rice in the machine that's flattening the rice, the pounder, and how she has to be so careful, because if she gets the timing off, then her hand gets pounded into flattened rice. And she's nursing the baby, taking care of the customer, and putting rice in the machine in the back. And that's what Thakur says. He says, I have done all the work for you. If you do only 1/16 of it, that's enough. Just do 1/16 of it and always keep your mind on God. You can carry on the day with 1/16 of your mind running your mantra, thinking of the beloved, remembering to breathe into the present, remembering to let the past go and to take your eyes off of an imagined future and stay here now, and use mindfulness. That's what I've been working on the last couple of days, is using mindfulness to stay present. So that the other day I was cleaning the bathroom. Joy to the world, cleaning the bathroom. And you sit there and, normally you're just trying to get it finished. That means you're not being present. If ever you work to get something finished or to get it done, you're not being present. You're living in the future. And if you live in the future, Eckhart Tolle says you're going to be full of anxiety, right? So don't live in the future. You'll be anxious. Live in the present and bring your mind down and pay attention to how you're doing your work. Do you remember that story I told about the shrine in San Francisco? That it was one of these very, very ornate little curlicues everywhere, little little flowers and lotuses and whatnots. And I'd have to get in there every day, and I'd have to fold the napkin and get into all those little nooks and crannies to do that thing. And one day I just had enough of it, right? And I literally sat on the shrine right next to Thakur, holding the napkin in my hand. And I was like, Thakur, this is nonsense. I said, this room is cleaner than any other room in this monastery. I clean this thing every single day. And I sit here doing all of this little detail work day after day. It's just ridiculous. There's no purpose to it. There's no point to it. I said, I just can't wait to get finished with it. And I sat there. And, I find the shrine always to be very magical in that way, because I got my answer. And what I just shared just a few minutes ago was the answer. Thakur said, you clean my shrine to get it finished. That's why it is such an unpleasant task for you. He said, if you would clean the shrine and spend time with me, it would become the highlight of your day. Be with me now and do your work. That made all the difference. It made all the difference. I began joking, began having fun, taking care of it, doing a significantly better job than I had been doing it before. So that's exactly what the brother here is trying to tell us, is sharing with us, All right, so Theo left to Philadelphia in the second part of the book. His teaching surprised me when he lays down that one should that one and the same person at one and the same time should do three quite different things. Seated at a table, supply your body with food, your ear with reading, and your mind with prayer. But the memory of that very happy evening the day before really gave me from my own experience the meaning of this thought. And here also the secret was revealed to me that the mind and the heart are not one and the same thing. As soon as the major rose, I went to thank him for his kindness and to say goodbye. He gave me tea and a ruble and bade me farewell. I set off again, feeling very happy. I had gone over half a mile when I remembered I had promised the soldiers a ruble, and that now this ruble had come to me in quite an unlooked-for way. Should I give it to them or not? At first I thought, they beat you and they robbed you. Moreover, this money will be of no use to them whatever, since they are under arrest. But afterward, other thoughts came to me. Remember, it is written in the Bible, if thine enemy hungers, feed him. And Jesus Christ himself said, love your enemies. And if any man will take away your coat, let him have your cloak also. That settled it for me. I went, see his attitude toward it. If the scripture says it, that settles it for me. Any other argument has no weight. This is my commitment. This is the right thing to do. That settles it. That's how you make your yes a yes and your no a no. That settled it for me. I went back, and just as I got to the house, all the convicts came out to start on the next stage of their march. I went quickly up to my 2 soldiers. I handed them my ruble and said, "Repent and pray. Jesus Christ loves men. He will not forsake you." And with that, I left them and went on my way. After doing some 30 miles along the main road, I thought I would take a bypath so that I might be more by myself and read more quietly. That's cool. So what he's doing there, he's starting to change his life to accommodate his spiritual practices. So another hint, if we were to write down his whole process here, it's a perfect lesson for success, for how to really grow spiritually. I thought I would take a bypath so that I might be more by myself and read more quietly. For a long time, while I walked through the heart of the forest, and but rarely came upon a village, at times I passed almost the whole day sitting under the trees and carefully reading the Philokalia, from which I gained a surprising amount of knowledge. My heart kindled with desire for union with God by means of the interior prayer. So his mantra, remember Thakur tells us that the mantra produces this longing for God, this love for God. It's our devotion that produces devotion, right? So here we're seeing that reiterated. My heart kindled with desire for union with God by means of interior prayer, and I was eager to learn it under the guidance and control of my book. At the same time, I felt sad that I had no dwelling where I could give myself up quietly to reading all the while. During this time, I read my Bible also, and I felt that I began to understand it more clearly than before, when I had failed to understand many things in it and had often been a prey to doubts. The Holy Fathers were right when they said that the Philokalia was the key to the mysteries of Holy Scripture. With the help that it gave me, I began to some extent to understand the hidden meaning of the Word of God. I began to see the meaning of such things, such sayings as the inner secret man of the heart, true prayer worships in the Spirit, the kingdom is within us, the intercession of the Holy Spirit with groanings that cannot be uttered, abide in me, give me thy heart, to put on Christ, the betrothal of the Spirit to our hearts, the cry from the depth of the heart, Abba, Father, and so on. And when with all of this in mind, I prayed with my heart, everything around me seemed delightful and marvelous. So by changing the condition of your own mind, you can change the entire universe, because the entire universe you live in is within your own mind. So if you change that, that's the whole secret to this purifying of the heart, of the mind. Running that mantra through your mind again and again. It helps us to renounce this private world of egoism, and more importantly, to find that greater thing, the big mind, the divine mind, that quiet, unchanging space within us. The trees, the grass, the birds, the earth, the air, the light seemed to be telling me that they existed for man's sake, that they witnessed to the love of God for man, that everything proved the love of God for man, that all things prayed to God and sang his praise. Yeah. Do you remember when Rama and Sita were walking in the woods and Rama told her, "Shh, can you hear?" And she said, "Hear what, Rama?" He says, "Listen, the birds are singing the Vedas." Yeah. And the master sitting on the sides of the Ganga could hear the waves lapping on the shore. He said, "I heard them repeating the ancient mantras." It's this notion, again, that we live within the scriptures. And once we start purifying the mind and the heart, this play with the divine, this walk with God becomes a walk with God. It doesn't just become living life. It becomes a walk through the scriptures with your beloved, learning at almost everything you can see, hear, taste, touch, smell, and beyond. Everything is a love letter to God, from God to you, right down to your existence. right down to your love, right down to your intelligence. This is your evidence of the presence of God. And the more you begin to pay attention to it, the more you begin to see it, the vaster it gets, the deeper it gets, the more lovely it is. Thus it was that I came to understand what the Philokalia calls the knowledge of the speech of all creatures, and I saw the means by which converse could be held with God's creatures. So he's learning that language of love. You saw that as a wonderful poem by Hafiz, where a street dog runs up to him. And he says, I knelt down, I scratched his chin, and I whispered in my beloved's ear, Beloved, I am so happy you have come to visit me today. So it's that seeing, to really see God everywhere. And you will realize that you're not pretending, that you are seeing God everywhere. And the deeper that conviction is within you, God will speak to you directly, unmistakably, from everywhere. You will never, ever, ever feel that separation. In this way, I wandered about for a long time, coming at length to so lonely a district that for 3 days I came upon no village at all. My supply of dried bread was used up, and I began to be very much cast down at the thought I might die of hunger. I began to pray my hardest in the depths of my heart. All my fears went, and I entrusted myself to the will of God. There it is. Entrust yourself to the will of God. He didn't pray, don't let me die of hunger. He made his petition, told him his concerns, and then resigned himself to the will of God. That's acceptance. That's surrender. And that's how we live in the moment. That's what Eckhart Tolle is talking about when he says to accept the moment, not just accept it, but love it, lean into it. That is us giving ourselves up to the divine will in the moment, to entrust myself to the will of God. My peace of mind came back to me, and I was in good spirits again. When I had gone a little farther along the road, which here skirted a huge forest, I caught sight of a dog which came out of it and ran along in front of me. I called it, and it came to me with a great show of friendliness. I was glad, and I thought, here is another case of God's goodness. No doubt there is a flock grazing in the forest, and this dog belongs to that shepherd. Or perhaps somebody is shooting in the neighborhood. Whichever it is, I shall be able to beg a piece of bread, if nothing more, for I have eaten nothing for 24 hours. Or at least I shall be able to find out where the nearest village is. After jumping around me for some little time, and seeing that I was not going to give him anything, the dog trotted back to the forest along the narrow footpath by which it had come out. I followed, and a few hundred yards further on, looking between the trees, I saw him run into a hole from which he looked out and began to bark. At the same time, a thin and pale, middle-aged peasant came into view from behind a great tree. He asked me where I came from, and for my part, I wanted to know how he came to be there, and so we started friendly talk. He took me into his mud hut and told me that he was a forester and that he looked after this particular wood, which had been sold for felling. He set bread and salt before me, and we began to talk. How I envy you, said I, being able to live so nicely alone in this quiet instead of being like me. I wander from place to place and rub along with all sorts of people. You can stop here too, if you like, he answered. The old forester's hut is quite near here. It is half ruined, but still quite fit to live in the summer. I suppose you have your passport. As far as bread goes, we shall always have plenty of that. It is brought to me every week from my village. This spring here never dries up. For my part, brother, I have eaten nothing but bread and have drunk nothing but water for the last 10 years. This is how things stand. When autumn comes and the peasants have ended their work on the land, some 200 workmen will be coming out to cut down this wood. Then I shall have no further business here, and you will not be allowed to stay either. All right. We're going to stop there for this evening, but do you see this? That if you're open to the moment and you walk with the beloved, you only have to say something and things happen. You only have to have a desire for the love of God, for the company of the divine, and you can walk into a wood after not eating for 24 hours and say, gosh, you're so lucky you get to live here. And suddenly there's a place for you to live and food for you to eat and company for you for another year. That's what it is to converse with God through the world, through your life. To not forget that you are not separate and apart, that you're not in this alone, that the beloved is always present, always attentive, and always working for your good. Always. Right? Any questions or concerns? Good to see you. Yes.
As you were reading, I really started to remember Brother Lawrence. Just the way he would wash the dish pots or do those grimy works, and he would be just in bliss because he was remembering the presence. Mm-hmm. Everywhere he went, he was with his God, with his Father. So, really good reminder of that.
It is, and that joy that the Pilgrim talks about, and that his officer friend talked about, that after he had been repeating the prayer, the Lord's Prayer, after a couple of days, he said that he just felt this inexplicable lightness of being, just a bit of joy in life. That's that bliss, if you can quiet down the mind, the ego mind, the thinking mind, if you can settle it down quiet enough, that's when your innate bliss becomes apparent to you. In the noise of life, you can't hear that. You forget that you're content. You forget that life is sweet. And you get caught up in the anxieties and the to-dos and the wish I should haves and all of those. And you can't hear your nature anymore. You can't hear the big mind behind your egoistic veil.
Absolutely.
So it's very important. Yeah, Brother Lawrence and this man, they're the same man, really. Or woman in disguise, as it were. Yes. All right. So a week from this Sunday, none of you are here though. A week from this Sunday, we have a day-long retreat over down toward Red Rocks. And then next month, the 21st to the 23rd, is the 3-day retreat. So I just bring them up to put them in your mind, to pray for those that are coming and their success. And also, if you want to come or can come, you are more than welcome. So,
where would you be able to send the finances towards that link? Do you have on the website where you can send that?
You can send it. Yeah, you could put my address here right now in the chat. How's that?
Sure.
You can send it here if you want to come. That'd be great. Are you thinking about coming?
Yes, I'm thinking about it to see with my work schedule if I'll be able to make it work.
That'd be awesome if you could. South Avenue, Lafayette, Colorado, 80026. All right, there's my address. And you can just, if you're going to come, just send $50 for the reservation to hold a place. And then the total expenses for the room and board for 2 nights in the cabin and all your food is $200. So it's $250 altogether. If you can't pay that, don't worry about it. Pay what you can. If you can't pay anything, don't pay anything and come anyway. Your company is more important than money.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Swami.
Yes, yes, indeed.
And what are you doing on Sunday, Swami, or over the weekend at Red Rock, you said?
Yeah, a week from this coming, not this weekend, but the next weekend. We're just going and spending a day in quiet. I put together the schedule 2 days ago for them. It's in the morning, we get there, it's just chit chatting, and then there's a guided meditation and some reading. And then we're going for a walk, a meditation walk in the Red Rocks park, which is walking distance from this devotee's house.
Oh, and that's
Then
nice.
we're making a big lunch together. And then after lunch, I'm going to read some scriptures from different things and just kind of I'm hoping that they will trigger some conversation and some Q&A about things. And then we'll do some devotional singing and make a big spaghetti dinner together. And then evening arati, and then we'll call it a day.
Wow, that's nice.
After that, yeah, we're going to try and do that every month.